and welcome to Life Between the Notes, where we are going beyond the bio and bringing you interviews of your favorite South Central Pennsylvania musicians. I'm Kirsten Myers, a local oboist living in the Lancaster area, and with me today is, first of all, my cat, who will not stop talking to me.
The real star of the show.
Yeah. She'll be answering questions later. And Morgan Davis, actually, a local flutist, also in the Lancaster area. So, hi, Morgan.
Hi.
And how is your week going?
Oh, it's great. So, I think this is supposed to be like summer vacation right now, right? But it just feels really busy.
It does. June has been a busy month, which is when we're recording this one. So,
yeah.
But today we are so happy that bassist Mike Vitale is here to share his life as a musician in Lancaster and what his experiences have been and challenges he has encountered along the way. So, hello, Mike, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's fun.
Absolutely. Yes, and I just realized, am I saying your last name correctly?
What did you say? How did you say it? I don't even listen.
Vitale?
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. Phew. All right.
Well, it's amazing how the for being only 6 letters, if it's spelled correctly, how many different ways it gets pronounced, or if people hear it pronounced correctly, how many different ways it gets spelled. So,
oh, yes, for sure.
Got it. Yeah.
I totally understand. So we are actually at the point in our podcast where this is our 6th interview. And some people we know well and others we don't know as much about them. But that's the idea of this podcast, to get to know our colleagues and bring you their stories. So, for instance, I don't know if I've even played a gig with Mike before, but while all 3 of us teach at Millersville University, our paths don't necessarily cross frequently. Sometimes at the copy machine, I think.
I think we played at Lancaster Bible College.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yes, okay.
Yeah, so
there's one.
Yes, there's one, but we've been, we're like across the room from each other since.
That's true.
Like across the stage.
I think the first time that we played together, or maybe the only time, was at St. James, like right after I moved here downtown at like a mass or something.
Yeah.
I think that.
We all recently we played it at Franklin and Marshall.
Oh, no, that was the 7 Trumpets of the Apocalypse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That really was the title.
Yeah.
So, but I do have to say that, like, every single time that I encounter Mike, he just seems to be the friendliest person on the planet. He always has a smile on his face and kind things to say. So that, combined with his talent, is easy to see why he is a successful musician in our area. So, what's that?
It's all an act.
It's all an act. Okay. I don't believe that. So, to give you a little more insight into Mike, he holds a master's degree from Duquesne University in classical double bass performance and a bachelor's degree from Millersville University in music pedagogy and performance. He has performed with several orchestras in Pennsylvania and has extensive theater and opera experience, including national tours of The Wedding Singer, Footloose, and Beehive, the 60s musical. Mr. Vitale has played in over 40 states while touring with The Recipe, a bluegrass rock band, and outside the U.S. while working on cruise ships with Royal Caribbean International and Azamara Club Cruises. He also has backed artists including A Girl Named Tom, Charlie Gracie, Robert Gordon, Tommy Conwell, and Doug Jernigan. Currently, Michael has been working mainly with the Downtown Sound Band, the Vinegar Creek Constituency, and during the holidays performs in the American Music Theater Christmas Show. He also is on the music department faculty of Millersville University and maintains an active private teaching studio for both double and electric bassists and freelances with several groups in various venues all across the region. And that's it.
Sounds like I do a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. When you get to be our age, it racks up.
Wow, I'm tired.
Time for a nap. So Mike, so aside from Duquesne, have you lived in the Lancaster area all your life?
No. Let's see. My parents are from this area, both from this area, and
Okay.
When they first got married, they moved out of the area. They moved down to the DC area. They were working in DC, and so they moved south of Baltimore. And during all that time, and they had me during the last couple of years that they were down there.
Oh.
Then they moved back to Lancaster, and so I was raised. Generally, I was raised here, even though I wasn't born here. And
Right.
then I've been away and back several times, like Walford, Duquesne, cruise ship stuff. I lived outside of DC for a little bit in my 20s.
Okay.
Lived in Pittsburgh for a little while to, I'm going to say about 15, 20 years ago. I lived there for a little bit too.
Okay.
And had a house there. That was during some of the time that I was touring with the Recipe. They were based out of Morgantown, West Virginia.
Okay.
So I lived out there to be closer to the band. For a while, I was commuting from here.
Wow.
A long drive.
Well, yeah, but a lot of times it would be I would drive out there and then we would go on the road for like 3 weeks. So it really wasn't so that I would finish and then go back home. So it wasn't that as awkward as it sounds. I mean, we did play a lot of West Virginia, so
Right.
so yeah, it worked out. But
Okay.
when I was living in Pittsburgh, it was obviously much closer.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Okay.
So it's away and back a few times.
Right. So now, how long have you been in Lancaster? Like,
Last time, yeah.
yes.
Let's see. I'm gonna say about 15 years with or one or two. There was a year or two in there. I mean, 10 years definitely. There was a year or two where I lived in Bellefonte, north of State College.
Okay.
That's like where I'm from.
I lived right in Bellefonte. The person I was in a relationship with moved up. She got a job on the faculty at State College in the theater faculty, in the theater department, and I moved up there with her. But then I moved back.
Well, and we're happy you're here.
There were a lot of circumstances going on.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. So when did you start? Was double bass your first instrument? What was your first instrument?
Really, it was my first instrument. I mean, in elementary school, when they go around and ask what instruments I want to play, I initially said cello, and then no one picked bass. And when they first, finished, when they got around the room, I was like, "Hey, I'm pretty tall. I'll pick bass since no one else picked bass." So I picked bass. But I also, little known fact about me that hardly anyone knows this, but I played saxophone for about 3 months. And,
Wow.
yeah. So I think
closet woodwind.
yeah, I can't remember which instrument I started lessons on first, but I mean it was 3 months, so it wasn't really
Right. Yeah. So were you like in like fourth grade ish? I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I started in fourth grade on. I think that's when I started on bass. I think that's when I started on both instruments.
Yeah. Okay. So, and did your parents encourage you to start that, or were you the one who was like, yeah, I definitely want to do this, or like, how did that work?
Repressed memory just came out here too. So my mom was a church organist, and so I started piano lessons in like kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't like them at all. So I did that it was either 6 months or a year or something like that, and then I quit. So, but they were always encouraging in terms of instrument stuff, in terms of playing. In fact, at the time, I think it was like 5th grade or 6th grade when the person that was teaching at the school, the string teacher at the school, was like, you should take lessons out. I'm not a bass teacher. You should take lessons outside the school. My parents actually found a really good, the guy in the area, Wes Fisher, super nice guy, known for working with kids and all, and just, so many, encouraged so many students and everything coming up. So I was taking lessons. I took some lessons with him, and embarrassingly, I didn't like him. As young Mike Vitale just didn't click. I was like, who's this? This is terrible. Who's this old guy? And he's probably like the age I am now, and all this, and we just did not click. So I stopped bass lessons, and about a few months later, my mom came to me and asked if I would be willing to try to take bass lessons again if they found another teacher. So I said yes, and they did, and I stuck with it.
Yeah. So, and that's so important to find, a chemistry that works with a teacher, because you're just not going to be compatible with everybody.
Yeah. And it's so weird because, later on I've played gigs with Wes and met him, and he's like so nice and so cool and so good. And I was like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking when I was?
Yeah, but it's when you're young, and certain people can be intimidating, of course, and.
That's like such a crucial thing in lessons, is to feel like you connect at least a little bit, or you're like comfortable around the person. Because I've totally had teachers when I was younger where it was like they were a fine teacher, but it only lasted a little while because it was like it wasn't a good combination, or I didn't feel like at ease, I guess, but I always I think that's really interesting too. It's why it works. There can be multiple people teaching the same instrument in one area, because it's important for the students to have, that connection, and it just doesn't always work out. So when I lived in Wisconsin, there were three or four of us that had huge flute studios when I lived in Madison. We were each teaching 25, 30 students. And there was plenty of students to go around, and all of us, without talking about it, offered free trial lessons, because students would shop. They would go sort of shop around, what's your personality like, what's your teaching style like, and then land with whoever felt like the right person. And that was when I first started teaching privately, so I think it was some good insight for me, not to be worried on this side of it as a teacher, that you need to hoard students or something. It just doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've kind of learned that. I've learned that too as an instructor.
Oh yes, me too.
If it doesn't click with me, if I can get you to the right person, then great.
Yeah.
Or help.
Yeah. You would rather the student not quit, that they go and have a good experience playing the instrument, right. And it's hard on both people, the teacher and the student, if it's not a good fit for lessons.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that you've had people study with another teacher, but then come back to you for something, whether it's they don't really do this as well, but I know you do. So, especially if it's, they want to take, if we're dealing with upright bass, but then they want to take a couple of bass guitar lessons or something like that, and, I have to learn this to, my school wants me to play for the high school musical and there's bass guitar in it. Can you show me bass guitar? Because the person I'm taking upright from doesn't do that, I've had that happen too. So.
Yeah.
Just have to be chill about it. So.
Well, right. And often, if I have, a student who's going to leave, I just always say, look, my door is always open. Mm-hmm. If you ever, want to come back or, try something else or,
Yeah.
But, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then who was the teacher then that you ended up with?
Dave Rentschler.
Okay.
He was, I believe he actually eventually became, he was, I want to say he was a guidance counselor, or he was an administrator in the Lancaster School District. And he taught double bass and trumpet. He went to Westchester and I believe trumpet was his main instrument, but he played double bass in dance bands to work his way through school.
Oh.
Back in the day. So he was teaching. Double bass, and the and it was he would have a bunch of private students, and he would studio in his house. And you'd go in, and most of the time, there would be either a bass player or a trumpet player before or after you, and like the trumpet player that was next, like we were in the same schedule, either back to back one way or the other, for the longest time was someone, Eric Berlin, who is from this area, but he's on the faculty at Amherst now, and he played sub with like Boston Pops and all that, and he's really successful in the trumpet world. And it's funny because one thing that Mr. Rentschler would be he would overlap each of our lessons by like 5 minutes. And what he would do is he would have us play like double bass and trumpet blues duets. Yeah, to kind of overlap.
Cool.
So, that's fun.
So it was like, just kind of remember that, and I'm like, Eric's doing all this stuff in the classical world, and I remember playing blues with him.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah.
So, but he might not have had the Mr. Rentschler might not have had the classical training and everything, but he had whatever it was to help me stick with it, and enough. I mean, I went through the festivals, districts and regionals and states and all that stuff, counties, in high school. So he had several students that were in the festivals.
Yep. Okay. Great. So then when you were in high school, obviously you were involved in music. What else, were you involved in anything else in high school? Like, was it mostly just music related activities?
Music wise, I was in band, orchestra, chorus, jazz band, orchestras, all that stuff. I ended up, so I think my sophomore year, I tried out for football, and just going to try out for football, the right body size, except for all that stuff, and I like football, so. But what I was having trouble with is the practices over the summer. It was so hot, and lots of running and all that stuff. I was getting sick multiple times a day from that, and I'm like, this isn't fun. I don't like this. And so I quit during, I think it was during when the official practices start in August. I think I got through the first week or two of that, and I was just like, I'm sorry, this isn't for me. Right. And that night, I was playing in a little rock band, and the drummer was in marching band, and so that evening, I was just going up to, I was meeting him at the end of practice, a marching band practice, and I was going to hang out with him and some friends, and they came up to me and they were like, "Hey, do you want to play bass drum in marching band?" And so the morning I quit football, the evening I joined marching band.
Right.
So do you think that's happened to? I quit the football team and then I joined the marching band the same day. That seems like such a funny coincidence.
That's happened to other people. This is kind of funny.
Yeah, that's a quick turnaround.
Yeah, and then so that year I played bass drum, and then the next, my junior and senior year, I played bass guitar.
Okay.
Let's see, other stuff in high school. I worked on crew of some of the plays, some of the play backstage,
right,
for some of the stuff. I was on the chess team for a couple of years. Friends on the chess team. Probably some other stuff in there. I think I was my class vice president for a year in there somewhere. So
okay.
Which is more just popularity contest, but
yeah.
So
okay.
But yeah, but yeah, so I was involved in some other things, but it was a lot of music stuff.
Right. When did you start playing bass guitar then?
Um, Freshman year high school.
Okay.
Trying to think. Yeah, sometime during my freshman year, and I was one of those like I'd done. I mean, the times that I've been playing with people, it was all pretty much written out. Music was written out, and I got a bass guitar, and I was one of those. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't really, people want to jam, I would go over and I wouldn't know any songs,
Yeah.
and like, oh, these people were listening, learning them songs by ear, and that was a whole different skill set that I didn't have, and it wasn't very natural to me. So it was something that I had to kind of, work on and start on. Of course, I like the bands that I like are like progressive rock stuff. So I'm trying to learn Rush songs by ear, and I'm like, yeah, I don't have the skill set to play them or the skill set to really pick out the parts. And this was pre-internet where you can have someone give you the tutorial to show all this stuff, and everything's written out and everything. So that was a rude awakening for me there too, with when I'm playing with some people. But then when I would play musicals, the parts were largely written out,
Right.
and I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. I kind of get this instrument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it wasn't until a lot later on that my first cruise ship contract, that I actually sat down and kind of practiced bass guitar pretty seriously. Even though I did take some lessons on it during undergrad.
Okay.
So then,
what? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, so when did you did you develop that skill to play by ear? Like, when did that I'm always curious, like, if people start out, because like I'm very much like a put the page in front of me and I will play whatever it says. And you don't have to learn to play by ear if you're a classical flutist.
Right. Yeah. Well, I totally understand that, because it's so. I was playing with groups and bands, and I was kind of getting by. So after undergrad, I took like 4 or 5 years off in between undergrad and grad school, where I was kind of gigging and doing a lot of theater stuff, but sometimes there would be jazz gigs and some other things. So I was kind of aware, maybe more and more aware, that I'm like, wow, this is kind of important. Mm-hmm. And then my first cruise ship contract was with a whole bunch of people. Then I went to grad school, later 20s, and then my first gig out of grad school was on like bigger gig, was a cruise ship contract gig. And when I went into that group, the band, it was sort of a little bit of a throwback. Like the group that I was on, the person that I was replacing was part of a larger, I think it was like a 13-piece band. And a lot of them were big jazz fans and could do all this stuff and play by ear, and including the guy I was replacing. And they hated me because I came on, and I just remember the first rehearsal, the trombone player turned around and looked at the trumpet section. He was just like, looks like we have a reader, boys. And it wasn't meant as a compliment at all.
Yeah, right.
So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job on this ship. And that was not much of an exaggeration, with some things that kind of went on and everything. So I was trying to figure out how to make my ear better and everything. And then once I got off of that contract, I started thinking about ways that I could be better, and what I could do to be better in that light, or just kind of be better at kind of just playing on the spot. So I started going out to jam sessions and open mics. And then I became like a house bass player for one of them. And in that spot, people are coming up and like, hey, I want you to play bass for me. And I'm like, okay, what are we playing? Well, it's an original. I'm like, well, what key? What chords do you start on? Chords? I kind of do this and this and this. I'm like, okay, why don't you start and I'll just jump in. So doing that for a long time, and just kind of what I like to say is throwing myself into the fire, you know, at that point. But sometimes you do it and it's like, okay, that was pretty cool. Sometimes like that was great. Sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so embarrassed.
Right.
You know, but the more you do that, the better you get at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really wasn't until later on that I got kind of better. And it's still an ongoing thing. Like I you know, if I was a real jazz player, I would know a whole bunch of jazz standards just off the top of my head. I know a few, but not nearly as many as I really should at this point in my career if I was going to pursue that.
It's so interesting because it's like I think you have to do it to learn it, but you know, and then it's like where do you do that? I mean, it's a thing you can practice, but you to some extent you have to be in that situation. Like I had a church gig when I lived in Wisconsin, ironically at a Catholic church, which you wouldn't think would require a whole lot of playing by ear, but we had a really great music director, and he would just throw things at us. He'd be like, oh, hey, I want to do this in this key, or could you just like vamp something over top of this thing that I'm playing, and that was like so new to me. And so I think that being in that environment, that was like the first time I really had to, but it was doing it that made it better. Like if I wouldn't have been in that situation, I don't think I would have really spent the time on that skill set. So I'm always curious how that like people like grow that skill for themselves when you've already sort of started out reading.
Yeah. Well, and that's I totally get that, and that's why I said like the jam sessions, because it's like, oh well, there's some people that come out and want to do the same song pretty much a few weeks in a row, so you get better at it. Or it's like, oh, I'm going to go home and listen to that because I didn't do very well on it or something. And then, you know, then the next person comes out and you're like, oh, I feel good about this. The next person comes out and says, oh, I want to do it in this key instead. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do it as I want to do, you know, all blues, you know, which is like the 6/8, 12/8 feel kind of thing. And they're like, let's do it in 4. And you're like, okay. And then that further kind of, you know, which at this point, I mean, I can do that because I've done it a few times, but when you first do it, it's like, okay, processing.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it was a little uncomfortable at first. But yeah, like you said, the more you kind of do it, the only way to really do that is to do it. And so I still like going out to open mics or jam sessions for that reason too. It's like, oh yeah, I know this song, or oh, I don't know this one. And, you know, there are people out there watching this, and, you know,
right. Well, and
it's
that's
the one. But
I was just going to say that's just so impressive to me that you do that and you're able to put yourself in those situations, because I think I would crumble, like, because I'm definitely a reader, and that kind of.
And I mean, you could also, I mean, obviously now with technology, there are some, it's not the same thing, but like, there are like apps that you can get that can, you know, there's one iReal Pro that, yes, Apple, if you want to endorse me, that's fine. But it's you know, that will play, you can choose like bass, drums, and piano, like in the most simple version. So I take the bass out, but you can have like the drums and piano just kind of loop chords or changes. And you can change the keys, all that stuff, and I can use that to work on bass lines or solos, and or just kind of improvising. And something that I've been starting to incorporate a little bit into my practice is it's like, okay, I'm just going to play for 5 minutes, total free improv right now. Because one of the things that I feel that I still get really nervous about, and I'm still trying to work on better soloist. That's not usually the bass player's realm.
Role, yeah.
But it does happen. You know, it does, you know, and so I want to be better at that. Or they'll look at me, go, and I'm like, eh.
Well, that's great though. I mean, you're constantly trying to improve. I mean, that's great. So, now, so you went to Millersville, right?
Yes.
So, and what, why did you choose Millersville? or should I not ask that question?
No. There's always a story, I guess, with me. So, I actually auditioned and was accepted to University of Maryland, for music, and I had a scholarship. July of that, in between, when I was supposed to start, school in August, start the semester. In July, I got notification from University of Maryland that they lost my financial aid.
Oh.
And I don't know really. I mean, that's what it actually said. I don't know what that really.
What that meant, yeah.
Else, whatever. But so at that point, I'm like, I can't afford to go. And I grew up in Millersville. So when my parents first moved back to Lancaster, they lived a little bit east of the city. And then when I was like 12, they moved to Millersville. So I went to Penn Manor High School, right next to Millersville's campus and all that stuff. And so the person that actually signed me up for bass way back in 4th grade was this guy, Peter Brye, who was doing his student teaching. And so he signed me up for bass. And my senior year district orchestra was at Millersville.
Okay.
And it was on Millersville's campus, and he was the guest conductor. So we reconnected after however many years.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to him, and he was like, "Yeah, you should come to Miller." So within like 3 weeks, I had gone from University of Maryland to Millersville. It was close, afford it, or with working and all that kind of stuff. And so it was. The plan was at that point was maybe to go to Millersville for a year or two and maybe transfer. Well, I was part-time for 2 years at Millersville and then full-time for 3.
Okay. Okay.
I was working because at that point it was too late for any scholarship money from Millersville. So I was working I was working day jobs and stuff and going to school. So that's why I was part-time for a couple of years.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and for anybody who's listening who might not know who Peter Brye is, he is a cellist in the Lancaster area, but he was also the orchestra conductor at Millersville University and also of the Reading Youth Symphony for many, many years. So
I was going to mention that, and I just totally left all that out.
No. I mean, that's what I'm here to help explain some of these things.
That's not what I'm here for, because I have like snippets of knowledge about things, but I feel like you always know all the gaps of like how people fit together, Kirsten.
Some.
You're here for a little while, you start to hear all the same names over and over and over again, and you meet a lot of people, but there's so many musicians here who have been here for such a long time, you just don't ever meet them all, You hear about what they've done and who they've worked with,
and I love that. And so Peter was student teaching at your school.
Yes.
Wow.
It was so he was student teaching. It was I think I don't know. I mean, he might have been a non-traditional student at the time.
Yeah.
He was student teaching at Township, signed me up for lessons. So because he was student teaching, he didn't teach me. It was someone else who was there at the school. So he just signed me up and kind of, and I picked cello, I think maybe because he was a cellist and was so enthusiastic about cello.
Yes.
But then I was like, no, I'll pick bass because no one else picked it. And then, while I was at Millersville and he was, Districts was at Millersville and he was conducting that. Then I went to Millersville and he was conducting the orchestra. And he actually was, at the time, he was technically the bass teacher at Millersville. Millersville did not have an adjunct teacher. And he was like, come to Millersville and what we're going to do, and shoot, I know they wouldn't do this now, but he's like, we'll have you find someone to take lessons with off campus and you'll get credit for it.
Right.
So I did that for those 2 years that I was part-time.
Okay. I was actually wondering if I mean, I imagine you know Walter Blackburn,
Yes. He was
who,
on. He was orchestra. He was. I'm sorry, the choir, choral conductor, and I took a couple. I mean, during undergrad, conducting classes and uh, some of the vocal pedagogy classes.
okay. So, and he taught at Millersville as well, which is what you're
Yes.
talking of. But
Yeah.
he was a bass player, though, correct? Or,
Started doing. I don't know if he played when he was younger,
okay.
but he picked it up. I believe it was after I graduated.
Okay. All right.
He had an interest in bass.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because
Yeah.
he played bass in York Symphony for a number of years.
Yeah.
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 So,
Yes, I knew that because he talked to me about that because I played at New York Symphony for a while too, and but we never overlapped there. But
okay.
he was asked. I know when he was playing, when he was first starting to play. I don't know if he was taking lessons with anyone, but I know he. I talked to him a few times about some, just some questions or
Yeah.
questions about the bass. He asked me about
Hmm.
it. Completely coincidentally, his couple coincidences with it. His wife, Catherine, was my high school orchestra director.
Oh,
She was at Penn Manor for I think 5 years. And I was there for four, like during four of them.
okay.
And another coincidence is that he and his wife moved. Um, this was well after I had graduated, but he and his wife moved into into Millersville on the next street from my parents. Like I could see their house from my parents' kitchen window.
Oh,
So,
really? Wow. Wow.
yeah, so I would see,
Okay.
if we were both out in the neighborhood, if we were walking or something like that. So I saw him pretty often.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
It's a small
Yeah.
world.
It really is. I mean, I've had, some great conversations with Walter when he was playing in York Symphony, and yeah, it's just amazing that he had only picked up that instrument later, so much later in his life, and then was
Yes,
playing in symphony.
I can't remember if he said he played at all when he was younger or
Yeah,
not,
and
but I
he
know
would have. Yeah.
he wasn't. I had no idea. I know he wasn't playing when I was at Millersville. When I was a student at Millersville, like I had no idea. Like I learned a lot from him. Like my both singing and my ear. The like
Yes.
the oral stuff. That's really really sharp and even some. Not that I conduct very often or anything like that, but even like I learned a lot from him in conducting then too.
Great. So then after you were at Millersville, then you took time off, and you were gigging and working, right? And then
Yeah.
and then you went to Duquesne for
Yeah.
2 years.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, um, Millersville, I had during my 5 years, I had four different bass teachers.
Oh my gosh.
So I was constantly sort of starting over
Yeah.
with different things. And then during Millersville, I had started to play a lot with like Lancaster Symphony and before, freelance gigs in the Lancaster area. But because I was working during a lot of undergrad, and I was maybe not taking undergrad quite as seriously as I should have, and or playing that much. I was like, well, I kind of want to go back to. I was unhappy. I was working in the business world, and I was doing okay in that, and playing gigs and weekends. But I was kind of unhappy, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to school, and I'll try and focus a little bit more on music and give that take it more seriously, give that a shot. So I contacted. Someone said, "Hey, the bass teacher at Duquesne is really good," and someone else said, "Hey, the bass teacher at Carnegie Mellon is really good." So I contacted both schools and left messages on their music office phone, and I got a call back from Jeff Turner, who's principal bass player at Pittsburgh Symphony. he was actually the bass teacher at both schools.
Oh.
So he and due to circumstances out there, a number of players in the Pittsburgh Symphony were going back and forth between the two schools at the time, and the two schools were saying you have to make a decision, because what the teachers were doing were actually kind of pitting the schools against each other in terms of financial aid.
Right.
So schools were like, you have to pick one or the other. So Jeff was going to me. So I was like, hey, can I come out and take a lesson with you, and you can let me know on whether I should just like hang it up or if I should pursue things or anything, just to, you know, kind of let me know where I'm at. I went out, and he was like, okay, apparently I had some potential or something, because he was like, yeah, I'd like you to come here. And I was his grad assistant there for a couple of years.
Okay.
Which was good. Yeah. And I mean, my undergrad, I'm thankful for, for Dave Rentschler and all my undergrad teachers there too, because I feel like while I didn't necessarily, I like to say this, I didn't progress this way, like getting so much better technically. I got a lot of different broad ideas from just approaches to the instrument. And there were some teachers that I had that, like, I had a couple of really good teachers there that I probably wasn't ready for what they had to offer at the time. Like, I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, wish I could go back and take a couple lessons with them now.
Right.
I think because of my grad assistant duties, and I was playing in bands while I was in school, I practiced a lot, but I wasn't practicing I wasn't getting every day, the 4, 5, 6 hours that you should be for pursuing that stuff. And I learned kind of at the end of my first year that I was like, okay, well, I'm doing this just to be a better musician. And it took a little bit, because Jeff, while he would do other things bass-wise, he's deeply entrenched in the classical world. He's a monster orchestral player, teacher, masterclass technician, soloist. He does all of that stuff super well in the classical world. And I think it took a little bit for both of us to figure out what the heck I was doing there. And I think mainly because I was starting over a lot, and I either developed a lot of bad habits or just never learned the right habits to begin with. I essentially was starting over again I had so many technical things that were wrong,
Right.
not the best way to play, that I was essentially starting over with Jeff on all that stuff. And so there were some difficult times, I'm sure, for him and for me too with all that. So yes, but that was a great time though, and it's invaluable. Like, I would definitely not be like doing what I'm doing now if it hadn't been for Jeff and I mean everyone, but a lot of stuff now is Jeff's.
Right.
Even applying things to like how I practice and approach bass guitar are like, oh wow, this is a really logical way of practicing and getting stuff done and doing all this stuff, that my eyes were completely opened at that point.
Yeah. Well, and that's great. I mean, I'm sure it gave a new energy because you were, I don't know, it just gave a new energy to your future career too by doing that, by kind of starting back at square one.
It was frustrating though too, because I was like, well, I'm already gigging, I'm already doing this stuff, but I was also had to temper that with, but you want to be a better player and possibly have some other opportunities come out of this.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So was it after that then you had signed that cruise ship deal? Was this?
Yes. So after focusing mainly on classical stuff, playing with the alt band, like alt rock band too, while I was out there, but I actually looked into getting an artist diploma certificate at Duquesne after that, It was like I graduated, things fell apart with the band. I was looking at trying to do an artist diploma, essentially a piece of paper that says you practice for 2 years, um, which that's that's what I needed at that point because I was going to focus on classical. I had talked with Jeff pretty seriously, and he's like, "Well, your potential, your age, and all this stuff at the time is like, if you do that, you would put yourself probably on a level to compete with people not in the top 10 orchestras at the time, but maybe like that sort of next group that would be like full-time orchestras." And he's like, "But this is entirely up to you. You pretty much have to drop everything, knowing you and knowing where your skill set is, everything. You have to pretty much drop everything and focus just on classical," which I was willing to do. I applied for it, and then the school, since they had already invested 2 years in me with the grad assistant stuff, they did not want to invest in they wanted to give that aid to someone else, financial aid to someone else. So I ended up not going back for the artist diploma certificate because I wasn't sure I could afford the tuition at that point. And trying to think, I moved back, and the first sort of main thing, a couple months later, I got a random call about I had sent my resume out to a whole bunch of places and didn't hear anything. A whole bunch of booking and all that stuff, and then out of the blue, in early September, I got a call from someone from Royal Caribbean saying, "Hey, you have an opportunity. You want to do a cruise ship contract?" And I'm like, "Sure. How'd you get my information?" And apparently, one of the booking agents that I had sent my information to, somehow sent my name to him, and my resume or whatever ended up on a pile on his desk. And this was, I think this was. It was early September, and it was for a contract that started in later September. So it was like 3 weeks notice to go out on a 6-month contract. So I did an audition over the phone. He faxed me. This is pre like a lot of internet stuff. So he faxed me stuff, and I played my audition over the phone, and I got the gig. Because in spite of what the trombone players are, the cruise ship gig, there is a lot of reading and being able to read a whole bunch of different types of notation, let's put it that way, or sort of guess at stuff too. And so there's a lot of that involved in the gig. But I went on. And so after doing all the classical stuff, I think I played a musical over the summer, maybe Grease or something. And then went out on the cruise ship gig with a whole bunch of guys that lived in the jazz world, and I was completely out of my element at that point, because I was focusing on, different stuff. And so then it was like a different type of, that was where I was like, okay, well, this is a different type of lesson and a different type of learning experience. And that trombone player, he's legit. He was legit. He played with, toured with Buddy Rich, recorded with Sammy Davis and all that stuff. So hearing someone like that kind of like chop you down immediately, I was just like, didn't I have that already at grad school?
And you're like, I have 6 more months of this, right?
Yeah.
The 6-month contract.
Ironic part of that though is that you were both in the same place. Like it wasn't like so.
I looked at it like that, but I also looked at it like, oh man, this is one of many times during my career, during my musician career, that I was like questioning. I'm like, should I be doing this or should I be doing something else? Am I meant to be doing this? And the answer, after kind of having that day or two of, I feel awful. It's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to try and go down fighting if that's the case, and try and, am I going to look back at this moment and be like, did you just quit without trying to give everything that you really could have tried with and tried to do? And so, the cruise ship contract, to get out of the cruise ship contract, all I had to do was pay for my plane ticket home.
Oh,
And I mean, my first couple months on the ship, I was pretty miserable. I
yeah.
mean, it was rough. The people in the ship's orchestra were not super friendly. The people that I became friends with were actually the musicians that played in like the steel band and the Polish jazz quartet that was playing on the ship and all that. So I became friends with other people
Mhm.
before becoming friends with, before making friends in my own group.
Mhm.
And and I mean the music director there, the guy that was the actual music director on the ship there, Frank, guitar player, great guy. A couple times there were some things where he was just like, I'm not sure if this is going to work out. And I'm like, I'm trying, and
Right.
everything. I got through it. I mean, I got to the point, even at the end of the contract, that they were saying, so are you going to come back? So I got to that point. Like, I think by the end of my contract, I had worked on some stuff enough, and there's so many different great entertainers that come on the ships that there are different styles, and you really get to see where people's strengths and weaknesses are. So I think by the time we signed up, and also the trombone player, Jim Trimble, had he had a heart to heart with me at one point about stuff. He was just like, well, honestly, he was like, "You're drinking with me tonight, boy."
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, that means he's going to say something. And he talked to me about like the role of the bass player and what I should be doing and the rhythm section, all that stuff. And a lot of things that I hadn't really thought about, like listen and should try and develop my ear in a different way to
Right.
listen to
Mhm.
ensemble. And so I'm still trying to apply that and, approach,
Mhm.
try and be better. So
Yeah.
by the time I signed off, I think those folks, realized maybe I have some strengths too,
Mhm.
and so I actually did not end up going back, right after to that ship right away.
Right.
But
But you had
I
done other cruises though then.
I did about 9 or 10 years later.
Oh,
I
really?
was
Okay.
I was so nervous going
I'm
on.
sure.
I did two shorter, like that was a 6 month contract. The first one was a 6 month contract. The other two were like 2.5 months.
Okay.
And at that point in time, I was really nervous about going back on because I was like, oh boy, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm a better player. I think I've worked on these things. During that time is when I was doing a lot of theater stuff. I was also playing with different bands. I was doing the open mics, and
Mhm.
I felt like I'm like, okay, I think I have a good skill set for this now,
Mhm.
an opportunity. And I went on, and they were essentially fill-in contracts because they were 2.5 months long. And
Mhm.
I went on, and those were I mean, there's always tough things and always things that are like, oh my gosh, with the contract. But overall, it was, yeah, that was way better. Like I felt like, okay, cool, I can do this. And,
Right.
and I, and the industry had changed a little bit too. Some of the ship's orchestras were a little smaller,
Mhm.
and I think technology had caught up at that point, so that like even some of the in-house ship shows, they sent them to me a week or two in advance so that I could kind of practice them a little bit, so I wasn't just sight reading on the ship.
Right.
Like for the in-house shows. Um, they're still pretty hard, and there's a lot of stuff going on with them, but at least for me. And but but it was, I think the circumstance, like I feel much better about, like I wouldn't mind doing another cruise ship contract if the circumstances work out, because it's a great way to see great way to see parts of the world that you might not otherwise get a chance to see.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's a very unique experience, to be doing that.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and playing for different headliners, and
Oh yeah.
where some of the people who are on that list, I actually, no, I don't think I listed anyone that I backed on the ship on the
Mhm.
uh, on the bio, but yeah, played with some people who were really good, and then some people was like, okay, this is a different kind of challenge in some of these things.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but
So,
yeah, really good experience for a lot of things.
yeah. Um, so do you have a favorite style of music that you like to perform? I mean, you've done a lot, or
Such a good and tough question. Um,
I think it's hard as musicians because we often have like this eclectic, we like a lot of different, styles. And...
but trying to pick a style that I like, that's tough because it sometimes it depends on the people that I'm playing with,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
circumstances, and um, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. But
I
yeah,
like
I mean, the experiences that you have with music have a lot to do with the people that you're playing with too.
yes. Well, and bass is used in everything, so I've been fortunate and blessed enough with a whole bunch of opportunities in a bunch of different styles,
Mm-hmm.
and combination with, like you said, the people that you're with and the circumstances, it can make for a great experience, or kind of like, okay, I need to approach this as it's a job, and I need to do this in order to serve the job.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's not, and here again, that's not knocking anyone or anything. It's just, it's
Mm-hmm.
just what it is sometimes.
Right. Right.
That's an interesting aspect of our work, though, is like, everybody, like, music's supposed to be this big, like, emotional, like, enjoyable, like, thing. And sometimes it's just work, and that's like an interesting, like, I think that's a difficult transition to make if you have some success after school and you're working, to realize that, like, it's not all going to be like those big moments you had in school where you started like playing big pieces, or like, you think like, oh, I'm going to get all these like freelance jobs and it's going to be so ideal. And then you realize that like work is work sometimes.
Yeah. Well, but there are still plenty of moments, and sometimes it's you're not expecting when those moments happen then too.
Yeah.
Same with teaching.
Yeah.
So when did you start working at Millersville then?
I'm about to start my 10th year.
Okay. And so what is that like for you as as a person who went to that school and now teaching at that school? I mean, it's just kind of a cool thing, like, that you went to that university and now that you're teaching there, and
Well,
and you're giving those students a more consistent experience than what you had by being there, right?
yeah, I hope so. Yeah, but
I'm sure you are.
process too. I mean, I'd been teaching privately. I had taught for a couple of years at Lancaster Bible College, but I wasn't, and I went to Millersville, but going through the process of teaching at the state school, that's a whole other learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And
it really is. And academia is an adjunct. Like, so when you're an adjunct at a state school, and then having just gone through my first year of that, the learning curve is very steep.
Yes, yeah, it is. It definitely is, and especially over the last couple of years with like going like with COVID and all the virtual stuff and everything, and then also with budget cuts going on from the state.
Like, the learning, it's just understanding what applies to you and what doesn't, and there's like so much language and so much paperwork and that kind of stuff that has really nothing to do with what you're teaching. But just knowing like, oh, what's this deadline I have to keep, and what's this thing I'm responsible for, and
Yeah. Oh, this training. Oh, I need to do that, or this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned that the full-time faculty are really, they do care, and they're really helpful, and there are professors to help out, and yeah, that's good.
Right.
Go ahead.
And they're overloaded.
Yeah, right. I know this year I was like really trying to like reserve my questions for things. It's like, you can see the amount of work that's placed on people's shoulders, and it's like, you try to hang on to the things like, when do I really need help? Can I figure this out myself? And then making friends with other adjuncts, and being able to say like, hey, what did you do in this situation? Like, Who should I talk to? Do I need to have that conversation right now, or can I handle this myself?
Yeah, it's a lot of information to sift through, and I think just being that it's a state school,
Yes.
It's just a very different process than it is for a private college,
right? Like liberal arts.
It's yes.
How long have you been at Millersville?
22 years.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah. So you're just like, yeah, I know all this stuff.
I do not. I do not know all of it. I mean, I've been there that long, but I've also been somewhat peripheral, I would say, because, I have, just being oboe and or bassoon at times, they're just few students, and so, I'm like, my foot is like half in, half out of the door. So,
yeah, and I know I'm a little more involved because when I first started, that was when they were really starting to ramp up the business and technology program. So one of the things that they wanted to make sure was I was okay with teaching bass guitar and how I was going to approach that stuff.
You had mentioned to me before about an injury that you had in, was it 2009 with your finger? I think that kind of changed a lot of things for you.
Yes. So let's see. This would have been like we were talking about the two shorter cruise ship contracts that I did later on. And then I was also doing some theater tours during that time. So I was on the road a lot, and I was on the tour for The Wedding Singer, and I was also they were short on crew members, so I also took a position as what they call pit rat, and which is supposed to be like I travel with the crew, and I'm the one that sets up the pit and tears down the pit at each show. So like I set up the drums and I set up all the in-ear monitor systems and all that stuff so that when the band comes in, they can just come in and maybe do some minor adjustments and go. Well, because the tour didn't quite have enough people that they did, they also put on a responsibility with me of being responsible for being in charge of the group loading and unloading the electric tractor trailer. So all the light trusses, all the soundboards, all that stuff. At the end of the night, beginning of the night, and loading all that stuff is way more of a process than I ever imagined. I mean, it's like a huge game of like live Tetris, putting all that stuff in the truck, and things have to go on certain ways, that ways. And one night, and they're like, well, you won't, I was concerned about my hands with that. Because I'm like, well, I don't want to be, I mean, I use my hands to play. I don't, really want to damage them. And they're like, well, you really just have to tell people what to do and all that stuff. Well, because of the Tetris being so involved, it's really just better if I help. And I'm strong and, and I can help with that stuff. So I was doing that. And sure enough, like one night on the tour, we were pushing something on and a big theater drop hamper fell off of the top of the stack that was already on. And we were pushing the big soundboard console that they use out front. And it was in one of those big hard road cases. And the hamper fell off the stack and I did not get my hand out in time and essentially tore all the skin off of this finger and broke it, severed nerves and all that stuff. And it was pretty disgusting. And,
I'm so stressed out just like listening to this because I worry about my fingers all the time.
Yeah, so I went to the ER and got flown home, and they had to do skin graft surgery. They took skin from my wrist and put it on my finger, and I went through 10 months of physical therapy. It was pretty bad. Like it's like you don't realize like if you do this to your fingers, there's some give there because there's fatty tissue under your fingers there. All of that was gone. All of that, like the only reason my finger you can tell my finger looks a little different. But really right after the surgery, it's because I've built up so much callus under there. This was totally flat after the surgery. It's just, there was nothing there. Wow. And it was what the doctor, I was like, so, I'm going to be able to play for a living again, right? And he was like, you'll be able to play.
Oh.
And it was kind of like up to me, he's like, it's up to you on whether how you recover and all that stuff. So, and it was rough because, the first week that was in late October. The first week I went into the physical therapist and she's like, so what are your goals? And I'm like, well, the tour takes a Christmas break, but then goes back out on the road in January. I'm hoping to rejoin the tour in January. And she was like, no, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think a better goal would be maybe be able to tie your own shoes by then.
Oh gosh.
Okay.
Wow.
So they gave me the green light to practice, to start playing bass again, bass guitar. Can't even do upright at that point because it's so more strength and everything. But they gave me the green light to practice 20 minutes a day on bass guitar, or try to play 20 minutes a day. And even that was too much for the graft. Like the graft was blistering and starting to come apart. So like, okay, well now I need to stop for a couple of weeks and let that heal. And now you can play 5 minutes a day, and we'll build things up from there. And so I had to relearn. I didn't have any. I still don't really have any feeling in that part of my finger. So I really had to relearn how to play,
Right.
both bass guitar and upright bass. And at this point, that's a lot later. A lot later than most people were learning. But at that point, I was drawing upon a lot of stuff that I had learned, grad school, for when I could do the upright stuff, and even on bass guitar. I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to relearn, I'm going to try and do this in the most efficient, like try to relearn, quote, the right way or the better way and try to play.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another point at which where I was like, okay, do I want to keep doing this, or do I want to, am I meant to be doing something else?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really trying to learn how to play, quote, right, but also how to make things work. And it took a while, it took a long time, because you're thinking about like how to retrain this finger especially, but trying to retrain everything, how to do what you're doing with whatever little compromises I need to make with the other fingers to make up for that. And so then, because normally when you play, you're like, okay, I'll just pick up an instrument and do what I need to do. And these guys know, it's the muscle memory of these guys knowing what they've, doing. There, I didn't have the muscle memory, and it took me like a year to get that part of it. Then it was the mental part of, okay, now I want to get back to the point where I can say, okay, I'm looking at this stuff on the page, and I'm not thinking about, okay, here's where that feels like it's about in the right position, and all that. And So mentally, it took a while, like even more time to kind of get back.
Mm-hmm.
And so in relearning and going through that whole process, really, I'm in my early mid 50s now. And, so that was, my early 40s. That's a little later than most people were kind of learning how to play. So I feel like I'm a little bit closer. I'm not that far removed from learning how to play. And I feel like that kind of helps me as a teacher. Going through grad school where I had to relearn how to play everything, and I had developed, like I said, all these bad habits, or never developed good habits. And then relearning later on, there's a lot of stuff that I see in students. If they're doing something, I can relate to it a little bit better.
Oh yeah.
Because I've gone through it not terribly long ago.
Right.
And I remember that, having to kind of relearn twice as an adult,
Yeah.
a lot of that. Yeah.
So when you talk about relearning, are you talking like you're still using that finger, or are you using your other fingers to compensate for?
I relearned to use that finger without feeling in it.
Yeah. Okay, because you're numb. Is it?
Yeah. The nerves were severed. I feel like every now and then I feel like a little pressure or anything like that. But if I do take a pen and I do this, I feel a little bit kind of on the outsides of where the wound is, and on the tip of the finger, it's actually hypersensitive. So like if your foot falls asleep,
Yeah.
and comes back, you know how it's pins and needles and all that stuff. That's what the tip of my finger feels like a lot. So I have to kind of tap it on something like the desk or something to kind of deaden that a little bit sometimes. But so learning the higher positions on upright bass, like up in thumb position where you're playing on that part, was really painful when I first was like, I was really
Right.
It took me a while to kind of get used to being able to that sensation and being able to play up there, and then much less trying to play in tune, you know, all that stuff. And so that was a whole process. So yeah, but there are a couple of times where I might use my second finger, my middle finger, instead of my first finger. It's definitely not the as dominant a definitely not as dominant a finger as it was before the accident.
Right.
But it's not like I'm never using it or anything like that. Most of the time, it's just a first finger, here we go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I mean, that's just so admirable to me that you took the time and stuck with it, honestly, because I think a lot of people would be like, well, I'm just going down another path. I am, that they wouldn't stick with, playing their instruments. It'd be like, well, I'm getting a desk job now,
Well, and that went through my head, and there was a lot of stuff, and I was just
you
like,
did a lot of work. I mean, it would have been,
well,
very
and
experience to do something else.
Well, and it was another moment. It was another moment where I was like, okay, well, I'll give this a shot until I feel like, okay, I shouldn't be doing this, kind of thing. I was like, okay, well, I'll try it and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, isn't that such a great attitude to say, like, what's the worst thing that happens? You don't walk away from the situation saying like having regrets of not knowing.
Exactly.
It was this like you talked about with going to grad school, or like in this situation, you're not going to spend the rest of your life thinking, well, what if I would have done this other thing?
Yeah. I learned, like, there were a few decisions that I didn't make, or some things that I did do that later on I was like, well, what if? And I learned that lesson, I think, fairly early. Mm-hmm. So that became a question, for like major decisions for me. And this was another time where, well, have I done enough work that if I look back on this 10 years from now, that I'm like, okay, yeah, well, you gave it a shot and it didn't work out. And I was like, well, no, so I'll keep working, and all this, like I said, all the physical therapy days, and there were lots of little signs from higher powers and stuff that were kind of pushing me along, because I'm not saying I was all like super positive every day and all that. There were some times where I was going into physical therapy, and I'd never skipped physical therapy unless it was like, like a foot of snow on the ground or something like that. I was like, okay, this is part of, like, I got to do this. And I actually liked it because I felt like I was making progress in something. As frustrating as it was, but there were some times where I would go into physical therapy and I was feeling sorry for myself, and invariably those would be days where I would go in and there was someone who had suffered like some sort of industrial accident where they lost half of their fingers, like or half of these fingers would be gone, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to be going back into work in a couple of weeks. And I'm just like, okay, I should just keep my mouth shut and just do stuff. Right. And then I kind of looked at, once all that happened and I was trying to relearn how to play, and even when I was done with physical therapy, I was looking at practice as like continued physical therapy, too, part of it. So I was like, well, the only way to get better at doing this is to do it. So, and I was doing all sorts of little finger stretching exercises and, or finger strengthening exercises and stuff. I was doing that too. And the physical therapists the surgeon was amazing. The physical therapists were amazing. Like one day I went in and she was like, so I was thinking of you this morning. I was thinking about your therapy this morning, and I stole one of my 5-year-old's toys. And I'm like, okay. And she brought in like a wind-up toy for me to try it.
Turn it.
Motion and stuff. She's like, here's your physical therapy. So you have people that are doing all these strengthening exercises there. I'm trying to wind this thing up that's hopping across and not being able to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just like, oh my God.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a humbling experience, of course. Yeah, but
Well, I think it's like you were saying about just how it helps you relate to your students, or like the way it like you feel like you're a better teacher. And I think it's like I know places where I feel like the deficiencies that I had as a player past a point that I thought I should have had them, and then having to learn how to do those things well. Those are reasons that I feel capable as a teacher, because I experience that later. I understand the process of getting better at it, and then I can be more effective with my students. And so I think, it's a relatable thing. We're not teaching like a bunch of like, very rarely do you teach a student that can just like do everything you're asking them to do. And it's like when we have experiences that we have to like learn and work hard, and it makes us relatable to our students. Maybe it helps with their willingness, but also with our ability to communicate effectively.
yeah. Well, everyone has, and I stress this to every one of my students, that everyone has a different learning curve with different things. It's like there's something I'm like, you might see me as being able to do this stuff real easy, but there's some stuff that was really hard for me to do, to learn, or to do, and you might pick it up like that. And I'm always quick to tell them, I'm like, so jealous. You learned that in like 1 week or 5 minutes or whatever. And it took me like 4 months to even get close to be able to, I try and pass that stuff along too.
Yeah.
I think they need to hear that.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome, Mike. So we are just running out of time, unfortunately, but I have.
Yeah, I know. I'm very long-winded. I apologize.
No. No, this is all great stuff. But I do have one more question. Do you have a Spotify playlist, and what is currently on it? Or do you have like a million different Spotify playlists?
I do a bunch of different Spotify playlists. And it's funny. I'm going to say about a year ago, a little bit, maybe even a little bit less than a year ago, I was even just the random like daily lists that they would come up with were just totally on fire. Like everything, like there was one that was, like kid of the 80s. So like there's the 80s stuff that I liked. And there was one that was like the progressive rock stuff that I like. And then there was one that's like Irish music. Been to Ireland a couple times. I love that. And actually there were two different ones that were Irish. One was like trad, the traditional stuff, and one was more like newer bands, the more contemporary stuff. And I forget what the other one was, but that one kind of varied. But there was just like, oh my gosh, I could listen to any one of these, and they're great.
Yeah.
Except for the occasional Spotify rickrolls me for some reason. Which is weird. It's like, wow, I just heard a Rush song, a Yes song, a Genesis song, and Never Gonna Give You Up pops up. Where'd that go? But
but see, they know what you're thinking. What were you thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. But I joined a couple of. I subbed and I joined like a couple of wedding / corporate events bands last fall. I started subbing with them, and then one of them had a bass opening, so I'm playing with one and subbing with the other. It's Downtown Sound that was on the bio, and Central City Orchestra, and so there are a lot of songs to learn for them, and in learning those, I've been putting them on Spotify, and so those songs have permeated all of my Spotify lists, and I'm just like, okay. So, there's so much music that I like that's out there. I mean,
it's tough. I mean, do you have a favorite band or artist? Like maybe when growing up, like did you have?
Growing up, for the longest time, I was a big Rush fan. Like if you look, that's and I've seen them I saw them way more than I saw any other band. But I know, typical guy, bass player, musician thing to say, but it really, definitely. That was definitely the number one. But there's so many. Even just like bass players that I'll listen to their bands or different styles. And it just could be like what was I listening to? A couple songs just the other day. I was like, I'm in a Peter Gabriel mood, so I was putting in stuff. Or there's a band from the 70s, 80s, Triumph. You know, there's from, you know, that's a.
Okay.
There were another power trio from Canada that, you know, really good guitar playing on it, and very high vocals, high pitched vocals. So I was listening to them. It could be anything. I mean,
oh yeah. And
I know I haven't mentioned classical, but once in a while I'll put some classical on too, but not as often as you'd think for me having to.
No, I think I don't want to speak for people, but like I can't, if I'm listening to it, it's because I'm playing it. It's not like, I don't often, sometimes piano, like I'll put piano on in the background or whatever, but like orchestral music, it's I'm listening because I'm learning it
for a job. Yeah.
Well, there's things that I've played in the past that I haven't heard for a while that I might want to put on.
Yeah.
That I'll do that. But I was just also thinking, I also have kind of a fascination with trying to find live versions. Like some artists I think are really, really good live. Yeah. So I'll look for their live stuff. Like I've been listening to a lot of Bruce Hornsby live. Mm-hmm. Like studio stuff, like it's okay. But the live stuff is amazing. Great band. That, and also I might go down a rabbit hole of looking up cover versions of artists doing other songs. Like, you know, there's actually, you know, like Dolly Parton doing Stairway to Heaven, for instance, which is out there. And it's actually, I mean, it's, you know, it's Nashville, it's banjoed up, and she's got backing singers and all that stuff on it, but it's actually pretty darn good. And, you know, like that, you know, so there's stuff like that I'll go down.
It's good. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate that you did this, and I think, you know, people will really like listening to what you have to say.
Thank you. I hope that, I hope so. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, it's like, as much as I was talking, I don't really think, you know, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not sure anyone's going to find this very, you know, very interesting or anything. So, but
it's great. We really appreciate it. So thank you, Mike, and thank you to our listeners. This has been a lot of fun for Morgan and I to get to know our colleagues a bit better, and we hope you're enjoying these conversations. If you, our listeners, have any questions or suggestions as to who you might enjoy an interview of, or if you would like to sponsor any of our episodes, we have lots of musicians and students of musicians listening in. So please contact us at lifebetweenthenotes@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and video versions can be found on our Life Between the Notes YouTube channel. So follow us at all of these places and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So thank you, Mike, and thank you, Morgan. You are Zoom Wave.